Shattered Secrets. Chapter 1. Cracks in Paradise. Daniel Harrison sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the void, as if trying to find answers to the questions that had been tormenting him for months. The silence in the house, usually so comforting, now felt oppressive. It was hard to believe that just a short time ago, he was a happy husband and father, confidently looking toward the future. Now, only the ghosts of doubt stood before him, doubts he could no longer ignore. It all started with small things, subtle changes in Martha's behavior. His wife. She seemed more distant, often working late, and when asked what was keeping her, she would answer curtly, with a little interest. At first, he attributed it to stress at work, but then he started noticing more. She stopped looking him in the eyes when they talked. Her phone was often on silent, and messages would come in late at night, when they were supposed to be resting together. But the real shock came when he found a pair of men's glasses in her car. "Whose glasses are these?" he asked when he showed them to Martha. Without blinking, she replied that they belonged to a colleague, left behind after a work meeting. The explanation sounded reasonable, but something in her voice made him suspicious. That was the moment when he first felt the chill of distrust, a feeling that hadn't left him since. He knew their marriage had been going through a rough patch for some time. The passion that once bound them had given way to routine and habit. But even then, deep in Daniel's heart, there was hope that they could fix everything, that their love would withstand the test of time. Yet, with each passing day, that hope faded, replaced by darker thoughts. Today had been particularly difficult. Martha sent him a brief message. "Don't wait up. I'm working late." Daniel noticed her messages had become increasingly short and cold, and it started to worry him. But despite this, he tried to stay calm and not think the worst. Still, a sense of unease clung to him. He felt that something was coming, something inevitable and terrifying. Daniel glanced at his phone again and looked at their photo, taken a few years ago on the beach. They were both smiling, holding hands, as if the whole world belonged to them. He ran his finger across the screen, feeling how distant and foreign that image now seemed. He unwittingly wondered how long it had been since they were truly happy. He stood up from the bed, took a deep breath, and made a decision. He needed to talk to Martha, to find out what was going on. Maybe it was all just his imagination, and she was simply overwhelmed with work. But if not, he had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The chapter ended without answers, but with Daniel's firm resolve to end his doubts. He was ready for whatever awaited him. Chapter 2. A Dark Encounter. Daniel drove down the deserted street, dimly lit by a few scattered streetlights, and turned into the driveway of their house. Ahead, the familiar outline of the building came into view, but in that moment, he was overwhelmed by a strange premonition. The house, which had always welcomed him with warmth and comfort, now seemed foreign, as if he was approaching a place where something unknown and terrifying awaited him. He turned off the engine and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm himself and gather his thoughts. His heart was pounding, and his mind raced with a mixture of fear and determination. Unbidden, the memory of the men's glasses found in Martha's car resurfaced, and his anxiety flared anew. He wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but his instincts told him otherwise. When he opened his eyes, he noticed something unusual. A black car was parked at the curb, half hidden in the shadows of the trees. Under different circumstances, he might not have paid it any attention, but now, something about its presence felt wrong. He quickly scanned the vehicle, but saw nothing suspicious. No markings, no identifying features that could indicate who it belonged to. Daniel got out of his car and quietly closed the door. The cool night air was refreshing on his face, but it didn't ease his tension. As he climbed the steps to the front door, he suddenly stopped and listened. There wasn't a sound from inside. That was strange. Martha usually left the lights on in the living room, or at least the radio playing softly, but tonight, the house was plunged into complete silence, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. He inserted the key into the lock, turned it, and cautiously pushed the door open. Inside, it was dark, with only a faint glow from a streetlight seeping through the thick curtains, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Daniel took a few steps forward, listening to his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The sense of dread grew stronger. "Martha," he called out, but the only reply was the same oppressive silence. He moved through the hallway to the living room and peered. Inside, nothing. Then he headed upstairs to the bedroom. But as he reached the top of the stairs, he froze. He heard a noise, a faint but distinct sound coming from behind the closed door of their bedroom. Daniel approached the door cautiously, holding his breath, and gently pushed it open. At that moment, a terrible premonition gripped him, but he couldn't stop now. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a sight he could never have imagined, even in his worst nightmares. On the bed, where they had shared so many years together, lay Martha, but she was not alone. On either side of her were two men in police uniforms. All three were completely absorbed in their thoughts, unaware of his presence. The room reeked of cigarettes and alcohol, a smell utterly foreign to their home. Martha looked up, and seeing him, showed no surprise or shame. Instead, her eyes were cold, as if she had expected him to come and was waiting for him. "You must be tired, Daniel. Maybe you should leave," she said, with a chilling calmness. One of the men, smirking, added, "Yeah, Harrison, you'd better go if you don't want things to get worse for your kids." Daniel stood rooted to the spot, unable to believe what he was seeing. It felt like a horrible dream, one he was sure he would wake up from any second. But it was all too real. The room, these people, and his wife, who was now a stranger to him. Inside him, fear, anger, and despair battled for control. But the strongest feeling was the realization that he had lost everything he held dear. He turned and walked out of the room, trying not to let them see how badly his hands were trembling. As he descended the stairs, he no longer thought about where to go or what to do. The only thing repeating in his mind was the crushing awareness that his life would never be the same again. Chapter 3. The escape. Daniel couldn't remember how he ended up outside. The cold night air hit his face, snapping him back to reality. His hands still trembled, and his heart pounded in his chest, as though it was ready to burst. He wanted to scream, to break something, but instead he just stood there on the driveway, staring blankly at the empty street. A hollow emptiness consumed him, leaving only faint echoes of the horror he had just witnessed. The black car was still there, parked in the same spot, as if watching him. Daniel could feel the heavy gaze from within the shadows. An inner voice urged him to run, not to waste another second, but his legs refused to move, as if rooted to the ground. He had no idea what to do next. Everything he believed in had turned out to be a lie. His wife, whom he had lived with for so many years, was now a stranger, surrounded by dangerous men who would stop at nothing. His thoughts raced in chaotic circles, mixing anger, fear, and despair into an unbearable tangle. He knew he had to flee, to disappear, but he couldn't leave his children behind. They were his only purpose, the only reason he had to keep fighting. But how could he protect them when he was up against an entire network of people and power he couldn't even comprehend? Suddenly, another car appeared from around the corner. It moved slowly, as if searching for something. Daniel didn't wait to find out if it was connected to the men inside his house. He quickly got into his car, started the engine, and drove off, trying not to think about what might happen if he didn't escape in time. The car didn't follow him. but that brought no relief. Daniel knew they might be tracking his every move, knowing exactly where he would go. He recalled the words one of the policemen had spoken, a veiled threat against his children. The memory burned in his mind, and he made a snap decision. He had to get his children out and disappear as quickly as possible. Daniel knew he couldn't trust anyone, especially not the local police who might be involved. His only hope was his mother, who lived in a small town a couple of hours away. He hadn't needed her help like this since he was a child, but now the stakes were higher than ever. He understood that bringing his children to her would put her in danger, but he saw no other choice. The drive to his mother's house was long and exhausting. His mind was flooded with thoughts of what might happen next, but everything seemed blurry and unreal. When he finally arrived, it was well past midnight. His mother wasn't asleep. She had sensed something was wrong and was waiting for him with a cup of hot tea at the kitchen table. Daniel had never seen her look so worried. He briefly explained the situation, avoiding the worst details, and asked her to take care of the children while he figured out what to do next. Though shocked, his mother agreed. She had always been a strong woman, but there was fear in her eyes now. Fear for him, for her grandchildren, and for what lay ahead. Daniel could feel that fear creeping into his own heart, but he had no time to dwell on it. He knew that his children would be safe with her, at least for the moment. He had to act quickly and decisively. While his mother tucked the children into bed, Daniel stepped outside and sat on the porch, staring up at the night sky. He realized that his life would never be the same. What had happened that night had changed him forever. He was no longer a man with everything to lose. Now, he was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. Chapter 4. Unseen Allies. Daniel sat on the porch of his mother's house, staring into the dark night sky, the weight of the evening's events pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The past few hours had drained him of everything, his energy, his hope, even his sense of reality. But as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away, it left behind a cold, clear resolve. His children were safe for now, but he knew that wouldn't last. He had to take action, and he needed help. In the early dawn light, Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was only one person he could think of who might have the skills and resources to help him now. Olivia Wilson, a retired detective who had once been a close friend. She had always been sharp, intuitive, and relentless in her pursuit of the truth. If anyone could help him navigate this nightmare, it was her. He dialed her number, and after a few tense rings, Olivia answered, her voice calm but alert. "Daniel? It's been a while. What's going on?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment before he spilled everything. Martha's betrayal, the men in the house, the threats against his children. He could almost hear Olivia's mind working on the other end of the line as she listened in silence. When he finished, she didn't waste time with questions or reassurances. "Meet me at that old diner off Route 5 in an hour," she said. "We need to talk face to face. And Daniel, be careful. If what you're saying is true, you're dealing with something much bigger than just a few dirty cops." The diner was nearly empty when Daniel arrived. The neon lights flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked leather booths. Olivia was already there, seated in the corner with a cup of black coffee in front of her. She looked the same as he remembered, focused, intense, with a sharpness in her eyes that hinted at her years of experience. Daniel slid into the booth across from her, and they quickly got down to business. He recounted everything he knew, laying out the facts as clearly as he could. Olivia listened intently, her expression growing darker with each detail. When he finished, she leaned back in her seat, tapping her fingers thoughtfully on the table. "This isn't just about Martha's affair," Olivia finally said. "It sounds like she's involved in something Much bigger, something dangerous. Those men in your house weren't just there for fun. They're part of a network. Organized crime, maybe, or something even more complex. And if they're connected to the police, it's going to be nearly impossible to fight them head-on. Daniel nodded, his stomach knotting with anxiety. So what do we do? How do I protect my kids? Olivia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. We have to find their weak spot. Everyone has one, no matter how powerful they are. You said there's a document thereafter, something important enough that they're willing to kill for it. If we can get our hands on that, we might have a bargaining chip. But where do we even start? Daniel asked, feeling the weight of the task ahead. I'll start digging through my old contacts, Olivia said. I still know a few people who owe me favors. In the meantime, you need to stay low, keep your kids safe, and don't trust anyone, not even the police. Daniel agreed, though he felt a pang of fear. He had always relied on the system, on the law to protect him, but now, that very system seemed to be his enemy. As they left the diner, Olivia gave him a burner phone. Use this to contact me. Don't use your regular phone for anything important. They might be tracking you. Back at his mother's house, Daniel tried to sleep, but the events of the past day swirled in his mind, keeping him awake. He knew Olivia was right. This was bigger than anything he'd ever faced. But he wasn't alone anymore. With Olivia's help, he had a chance to fight back. He just had to be smart, careful, and one step ahead. Morning came, bringing with it a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel knew he was up against a powerful and dangerous enemy. But he also knew that he had to act, and act fast. The first move was theirs, but the next one would be his, and this time, he wouldn't be playing by their rules. As Daniel prepared for what lay ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. But for the sake of his children, he would face whatever dangers were on the horizon. He was ready to do whatever it took to bring down the people who had destroyed his life. Chapter 5: The Unraveling. Daniel awoke to the pale morning light filtering through the curtains, the uneasy feeling in his gut telling him that something was about to go terribly wrong. The tension of the previous days had built to a breaking point, and he knew that today would bring something unexpected, something he wasn't prepared for. He got up quietly, careful not to wake his mother or the children, and checked the burner phone Olivia had given him. There was a single message: "We need to meet, now, urgent." Without wasting time, Daniel slipped out of the house and drove to the secluded location Olivia had specified, a desolate park on the outskirts of town. As he approached, he saw her standing near a row of trees, her expression more intense than he'd ever seen it. She wasn't alone. A black SUV was parked nearby, with a man sitting inside, watching their every move. "Olivia, what's going on?" Daniel asked as he stepped out of the car, his voice filled with concern. Olivia glanced at the SUV, then back at Daniel, her face grim. "There's been a development, something I didn't expect. We need to talk, but we don't have much time." Before Daniel could respond, the door of the SUV opened, and out stepped a man Daniel didn't recognize. A tall, imposing figure in a sharp suit, exuding authority. He approached with a cold, calculated demeanor that set off every alarm in Daniel's mind. "Who is this?" Daniel demanded, his eyes darting between Olivia and the man. The man spoke first, his voice smooth but icy. "Daniel Harrison. My name is Agent Carter. I'm with a government agency that you've likely never heard of, and for good reason. We've been monitoring certain activities involving your wife, Martha, and a network of individuals who pose a significant threat to national security." Daniel's heart raced. What does Martha have to do with this? "What do you mean, national security?" Agent Carter exchanged a glance with Olivia, then continued. "Your wife has been involved in a conspiracy, far beyond what you could imagine. The men you encountered aren't just criminals. They're part of an international syndicate involved in espionage, illegal arms trade, and high-level corruption. And, unfortunately, Martha is deeply embedded in their operations. Daniel staggered back, struggling to process the information. Martha, working with a syndicate? No, that can't be true. She's a lawyer, not a criminal. Olivia stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. It's true, Daniel. She's been leading a double life for years. The case files, the meetings, the late nights, they were all cover for her real work. When I started digging, I uncovered connections that led straight to some of the most dangerous people in the world. Martha isn't just involved. She's a key player. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he could have imagined. But before he could react, Agent Carter dropped the real bombshell. We need your help, Daniel. Martha has gone rogue. She's made a move that threatens not just her organization, but the entire country. If we don't stop her now, countless lives could be at risk. And you're the only one who can get close enough to do it. Daniel's mind reeled. You want me to help you take down my own wife? How am I supposed to do that? I don't even know who she is anymore. Carter's eyes narrowed. We have intel suggesting that Martha plans to disappear soon, taking vital information with her. Information that could destabilize entire regions. She's meeting with her handlers tonight to finalize her escape. We need you to intercept her, gain her trust, and retrieve that information. If you don't, there won't be another chance. Olivia placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. I know this is a lot to take in, but you're the only one who can do this. If you don't, Martha could get away with everything, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Daniel was torn between loyalty and duty, between love and survival. The woman he had once shared his life with was now a stranger, an enemy even. But he couldn't deny the truth staring him in the face. He had to stop her, for the sake of his children, his country, and perhaps even his own soul. Fine, Daniel said, his voice steely. I'll do it. But after this, I never want to see her again. Agent Carter nodded. We'll provide you with everything you need. Meet her at the location we'll send you, and make sure she believes you're on her side. This has to go perfectly, or we'll all pay the price. As they finalized the plan, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this. Something Olivia and Carter weren't telling him. But there was no time to question it now. He was about to confront the woman who had betrayed him on every level, and he had to be ready for whatever came next. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the park, Daniel steeled himself for the confrontation ahead. The man he had once been was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, someone who could do what needed to be done. The game was about to reach its final move, and Daniel was determined to be the one who made it. But as he drove away, a dark thought gnawed at the back of his mind. What if this was all part of an even larger plan? A plan that he, once again, was unknowingly playing into. Chapter 6. The final confrontation night had fallen by the time Daniel arrived at the meeting location. A deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the distant hum of the city that seemed a world away. Daniel parked his car behind an old stack of shipping containers and took a moment to gather himself. His heart raced, but his mind was sharp, focused. He knew that tonight everything would change, one way or another. Agent Carter's instructions had been clear. Meet Martha, gain her trust, and retrieve the information she was carrying. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this operation than he'd been told. Olivia had been strangely quiet during their final briefing, her usual confidence replaced by a tense silence that set his nerves on edge. As he approached the entrance to the warehouse, Daniel spotted Martha waiting inside. She was standing near a table covered in documents, her back to him. The sight of her, so calm and composed, filled him with a mix of anger and sadness. This was the woman he had loved, the mother of his children, now reduced to a figure shrouded in lies and betrayal. "Martha," Daniel called out, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then, Martha spoke, her voice as cold and distant as the night around them. "So, they sent you," she said, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "I should have known they'd try something like this." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Martha, what are you doing? You've put everything at risk. Our family, our lives. Why?" Martha sighed, almost as if she were tired of it all. "You wouldn't understand, Daniel. This is bigger than you or me. I did what I had to do, and now it's too late to turn back." Daniel took a step closer, trying to read her expression, but she remained guarded. "You're wrong, Martha. It's not too late. We can still fix this. Just give me the information, and we can end this madness before anyone else gets hurt." Martha laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You think it's that simple? You don't know who you're dealing with, Daniel. These people, they don't forgive mistakes. They don't forget. If I give you what you want, we're both dead." Daniel hesitated, but then something in her eyes caught his attention. A flicker of fear, of doubt. She was scared, not just of the people she worked for, but of what she had become. It was a weakness, and Daniel knew he had to exploit it if he was going to save them both. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "We can find a way out, together, for the kids, for us." For a brief moment, Daniel thought he saw a glimmer of the old Martha, the woman he had fallen in love with, but just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating operative she had become. "No, Daniel," she replied, her voice hardening. "There's no going back. Not for me." Before Daniel could respond, the warehouse lights suddenly flickered on, blinding him. He shielded his eyes, trying to make sense of what was happening, when he heard footsteps approaching from all sides. Within seconds, they were surrounded by a group of armed men, their guns trained on both him and Martha. Martha's face paled. "What is this?" she hissed, looking around frantically. From behind the armed men, Agent Carter emerged, his expression as cold and emotionless as ever. He glanced at Daniel, then turned his attention to Martha. "I told you, Daniel, this was bigger than you realized. You've done well to bring her here. But now your part in this is over." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? You said we were going to stop her and get the information." Carter's lips curled into a faint smile. "I never said anything about stopping her. The information she has is valuable, yes, but not for the reasons you think. It's leverage, and we need her alive for that. But you're a loose end." Realization hit Daniel like a freight train. He had been played from the start. This wasn't about stopping Martha or saving lives. It was about power, control, and keeping secrets buried. Carter had used him to draw Martha out, and now that his usefulness was over, they were both expendable. Martha's eyes widened as she understood the betrayal. "You bastards! You used us both," Carter shrugged, indifferent. "That's the game. You should know that better than anyone, Martha." But before anyone could react, Martha moved. In one swift motion, she pulled a hidden gun from her jacket and fired at Carter, hitting him in the shoulder. The warehouse erupted in chaos as bullets flew, and Daniel dived for cover behind a stack of crates. Martha, bleeding but determined, raced towards Daniel. "Come on," she shouted, grabbing his arm. "We have to get out of here." For a split second, Daniel hesitated. But then he realized that, despite everything, Martha was still his best chance at survival. Together, they sprinted towards the exit, dodging gunfire as they went. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, signaling that more reinforcements were on the way. As they burst out of the warehouse and into the night, Daniel's mind raced with questions. Who could they trust? Where could they go? But there was no time to think, only time to run. They didn't stop until they were far from the warehouse, hidden in the shadows of an alleyway. Panting, bleeding, and exhausted, Daniel looked at Martha, who was clutching her wounded side. "This isn't over," she said through gritted teeth. "Not by a long shot." Daniel nodded, finally understanding the truth. The game they had been caught in was far bigger, far deadlier than he had ever imagined. And now, with both the syndicate and the government hunting them, they were on their own. But as he looked into Martha's eyes, he realized something else. She was the only one who truly understood what they were up against. They had no choice but to work together, to trust each other, even if it was only for survival. In that moment, Daniel made a decision. They would fight back. They would find the leverage they needed to bring down Carter and the syndicate, and they would do it on their own terms. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Daniel was no longer the pawn in this game. He was ready to be the one who called the shots. But as they disappeared into the night, one final thought lingered in his mind. In a game full of deception and betrayal, could he ever really trust Martha again? Chapter 7. Unraveling the web, the city streets were deserted as Daniel and Martha moved through the shadows, keeping to the alleys and back roads to avoid detection. The events at the warehouse had left them both shaken, but the adrenaline still pumped through their veins, driving them forward. The air was thick with the weight of betrayal, and Daniel could feel the tension between them, an unspoken distrust that lingered despite their shared predicament. As they ducked into an abandoned building to catch their breath, Daniel couldn't hold back any longer. "Martha, we can't keep running like this. We need a plan, and I need to know everything. No more secrets." Martha leaned against the crumbling wall, wincing as she applied pressure to her wound. She met his gaze, her eyes hard and determined. "You're right. But first, we need to find a place to lay low. Somewhere safe where we can figure out our next move." Daniel nodded, knowing she was right. They were vulnerable out here, exposed. "There's an old cabin upstate. My father used to take me there when I was a kid. It's remote, off the grid. We can go there." Martha agreed, and after stealing a car from a nearby lot, they drove in tense silence, the city lights fading behind them as they headed into the countryside. The drive was long, giving Daniel time to reflect on everything that had happened. He still couldn't fully grasp the depth of Martha's involvement in the syndicate, nor could he shake the gnawing feeling that she was holding something back. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a dim light over the dense forest that surrounded them. The cabin was just as Daniel remembered, small, rustic, and isolated. They secured the area, making sure no one had followed them, then settled inside. Sitting at the old wooden table, Daniel finally broke the silence. "Martha, I need to know. How deep does this go? What exactly were you involved in?" Martha sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. She looked tired, but there was a steely resolve in her voice as she began to speak. "It started as a simple deal. I thought I could make some extra money, help us get ahead. But then I got in too deep. The syndicate isn't just about money. They control information, influence, entire governments. I became their legal advisor, but over time, they pulled me deeper into their operations." She paused, her voice lowering. "When I realized what I was a part of, it was too late. They had dirt on me, on us. I tried to get out, but they wouldn't let me. They forced me to do things I'm not proud of, and when I saw how powerful they were, I knew I had to play along until I could find a way out." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "And the document?" What's in it? Martha's eyes flicked to the floor. It's a list of names, locations, and operations. It's their entire network, everything they've built. That's why Carter wanted it. With that information, he could take control of the syndicate or destroy it. But if it falls into the wrong hands, it could start a war, destabilize entire regions. Daniel's mind raced. This was bigger than he had imagined. So why did Carter betray us? Martha shook her head. He never intended to let us walk away. He's been playing both sides, using us to get what he wanted. He's just as dangerous as the syndicate, maybe even more so. If he gets that document, he'll use it to gain power, no matter the cost. Daniel clenched his fists, anger boiling within him. They had been manipulated, used as pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. But now, with the truth laid bare, he knew what they had to do. "We need to turn the tables on Carter," Daniel said, his voice firm. "We have to find a way to expose him and the syndicate. If we can get that document to the right people, we might be able to stop them both." Martha nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "But it won't be easy. The syndicate has eyes everywhere, and Carter's resources are vast. We'll need to move carefully, find allies who can help us." Daniel thought for a moment, then remembered someone who might be able to tip the scales in their favor. "There's a journalist I know, someone who's been investigating corruption for years. She's relentless and has connections in the highest circles. If we can get her the document, she could blow this whole thing wide open." Martha looked skeptical. "And you trust her?" Daniel met her gaze. "I do. But we'll need to be smart about this. We can't contact her directly. It's too risky. We'll have to lure Carter and the syndicate into a trap, make them think they've won, then release the information to the public." Martha considered the plan, then nodded slowly. "It's risky, but it might work. We'll need to create a diversion, something to draw their attention away while we make the drop." As they began to map out the details, Daniel felt a sense of purpose returning. For the first time in days, he wasn't just reacting, he was planning, strategizing. But beneath it all, the doubts lingered. Could he really trust Martha? Could she trust him? Or were they both too far gone? Their loyalties twisted by the lies and betrayals that had brought them here. The next few days would determine everything. They would either take down the forces that had destroyed their lives, or they would be crushed by them. There was no middle ground, no safe way out. They had to see it through to the end. But as they prepared for the final showdown, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still pulling the strings. The game had changed, but the players remained the same. And in this game, there could only be one winner. The question was, who would it be? Chapter 8. The final gambit, the plan, was in motion. For days, Daniel and Martha meticulously laid out every step, knowing that one mistake could cost them everything. They had chosen their battlefield, a crumbling, abandoned hotel on the outskirts of the city. It was the perfect place for a showdown, a place where shadows would blur the lines between friend and foe, truth and deception. As the night of the operation approached, the tension between them grew. The unresolved questions, the doubts, and the betrayals weighed heavily on their minds. Yet, they both knew that hesitation could be fatal. This was their last chance to bring down Carter, the syndicate, and all the forces that had conspired against them. The night was cold, the sky a deep, inky black. Daniel and Martha arrived at the hotel first, moving silently through the darkened hallways. They set up a temporary command center in the lobby, using the old, dusty furniture as cover. The plan was simple: lure Carter and the syndicate into the trap, expose them, and make their escape. But simple plans rarely go as expected. Just before midnight, Daniel received a message on the burner phone, a single word: ready. It was from the journalist, Sarah Blake, the only person Daniel trusted to handle the explosive information they were about to unleash. She was positioned a safe distance away, ready to publish everything as soon as she received the signal. The truth would be their weapon, and once it was out, there would be no going back. "Martha," Daniel said quietly, his eyes scanning the darkened hotel. "Are you sure about this? There's no second chance if we get this wrong." Martha looked at him, her face unreadable. "I'm sure. We either finish this tonight or we don't leave this place alive." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the night. They both tensed, knowing it was time. The trap was set, and now all they could do was wait. The first to arrive was Carter, flanked by a squad of armed men. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. As he entered the lobby, his cold eyes locked onto Daniel and Martha, who stood waiting in the shadows. "Daniel, Martha," Carter greeted them with a smirk. "You've put up quite a fight, but it's over. Hand over the document, and maybe I'll let you live." Daniel stepped forward, his expression calm but defiant. "It's not that simple, Carter. You've underestimated us. You're not the only one who knows how to play this game." Carter's smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. "I'm done with the games. Where's the document?" Martha, standing beside Daniel, held up a flash drive. "Right here. But first, we want guarantees. Our safety, our freedom. If you try anything, this goes public, and everything you've built will crumble." Carter's eyes narrowed. He glanced at his men, then back at Daniel and Martha. "You're bluffing." Daniel shook his head. "No bluff. We've already made sure the information is in the hands of someone who'll release it if we don't check in. You might kill us, but you'll lose everything." For a moment, it seemed like Carter was weighing his options. But then, his expression shifted into something darker, more sinister. "You think you're in control, but you've been outmaneuvered from the start." As if on cue, the doors of the hotel burst open, and a second group of armed men stormed in. But these weren't Carter's men. They were syndicate operatives, led by none other than Lyle Jennings, the man Daniel had only heard about in whispers. Jennings was tall, with a cold, calculating demeanor that sent chills down Daniel's spine. He looked at Carter with thinly veiled contempt before turning his attention to Daniel and Martha. "Well, well," Jennings said, his voice smooth as silk. "It seems we have ourselves a little reunion. Carter, you've been sloppy. You should have known better than to let things get this far." Carter stiffened but remained silent. He knew he had been outplayed. Jennings continued, his gaze shifting to Martha. "And you, my dear, I'm disappointed. You were one of our best. And now you've thrown it all away for what? A man who never understood the bigger picture." Martha's face remained impassive, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes. Jennings had always been the real power behind the syndicate, the one pulling the strings. They had walked into a trap within a trap. "This ends now," Jennings said, signaling his men to advance. "Give me the document, and maybe, just maybe, I'll make your deaths quick." But just as the men moved forward, a loud crash echoed through the building, followed by the blaring of alarms. The power flickered, and then the lights went out completely, plunging the hotel into darkness. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed Martha's hand, and they bolted toward the back exit they had scouted earlier. Gunfire erupted behind them as Carter's and Jennings' men clashed, each side vying for control of the situation. But in the chaos, Daniel and Martha had one advantage. They knew the layout of the building better than anyone. They raced through the narrow hallways, the sounds of the battle fading behind them. As they reached the rear of the building, Daniel saw a faint light ahead, a way out. But before they could reach it, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. It was Olivia. She held a gun, aimed directly at Daniel and Martha. Her face was a mask of conflicted emotions, but her eyes were resolute. "Olivia?" Daniel breathed, shocked. What are you doing here?" Olivia's voice was steady, but tinged with regret. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but you don't understand. This has never been about you or Martha. It's always been about something bigger. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to end this, once and for all." Martha tightened her grip on Daniel's hand, ready to fight. But Daniel could see the truth in Olivia's eyes. She wasn't their enemy. Not really. She was just another pawn in a game that had spiraled out of control. "Olivia, please," Daniel pleaded. "You don't have to do this." But before Olivia could respond, the building shook with another explosion, this one much closer. The force of the blast knocked all three of them to the ground. Dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to see or breathe. When the dust settled, Daniel struggled to his feet, his ears ringing from the blast. Olivia was lying nearby, unconscious but alive. Martha was already pulling him toward the exit, her determination unshaken. "We have to go, Daniel. Now," she shouted. With one last glance at Olivia, Daniel turned and ran with Martha, leaving the crumbling hotel behind them. They burst out into the night, their lungs burning as they gasped for air. In the distance, they could hear sirens and helicopters. Backup had finally arrived, but it was too late to save anyone inside. As they made their way to the car they had stashed nearby, Daniel felt a sense of finality wash over him. They had survived, but the game was far from over. Carter, Jennings, Olivia, all of them were still out there, still dangerous. And the document, now in their hands, was both a blessing and a curse. They drove in silence, the city's lights fading behind them as they headed into the unknown. They had won this battle, but the war was still ahead. Martha broke the silence, her voice soft. "Where do we go now?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "We go underground. We disappear until we're ready to strike back. We use the document to find leverage, to build allies, and when the time is right, we expose them all." Martha nodded, but Daniel could see the exhaustion in her eyes. They were both running on fumes, fueled by nothing but sheer willpower. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Daniel realized that their journey was only just beginning. They were fugitives now, hunted by enemies on all sides. But they had something none of their foes had: a burning need for justice, for revenge, and for redemption. And as long as they had that, they still had a chance. But as the car sped down the empty highway, Daniel couldn't help but wonder, in a world where everyone is playing their own game, could they really trust anyone? Even each other? The answer would come, but only time would tell, whether it would be in the form of victory or betrayal. Chapter 9. The Last Move. Weeks had passed since the night at the abandoned hotel, but the sense of danger that hung over Daniel and Martha never faded. They had gone underground, changing locations every few days, always looking over their shoulders. The document they had obtained, an explosive piece of evidence that could bring down Carter, Jennings, and the entire syndicate, was their lifeline. But it was also a ticking time bomb. They knew that as long as they held on to it, they were targets, but giving it up to the wrong person could be even worse. One evening, holed up in a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods, they received an unexpected message on the burner phone. It was from Sarah Blake, the journalist Daniel had contacted earlier. The message was brief. "I found something. We need to meet. Come alone." Martha's eyes narrowed as she read the message over Daniel's shoulder. "It could be a trap," Daniel nodded. "It could be, but Sarah's the only person left who can help us. If she's found something, we have to take the risk." They argued briefly, but in the end, Daniel decided to go alone, leaving Martha behind to keep the documents safe. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down, he was starting to question everyone's motives, even hers. They had been through so much together, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were beginning to take root. The meeting place Sarah had chosen was a derelict warehouse on the edge of a small town. The setting felt eerily familiar, a stark reminder of the trap they had narrowly escaped before. But Daniel had no choice. If there was even a chance Sarah had found a way to expose everything, he had to take it. When he arrived, the warehouse was dark and quiet, the only sound the wind whistling through the broken windows. Daniel parked his car a block away and approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. He could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. If this was a trap, it could all end here. Inside, the warehouse was as empty and abandoned as it looked from the outside. Daniel's footsteps echoed loudly as he made his way through the shadows. Suddenly he heard a noise, a scuffle of shoes on concrete, and turned to see Sarah stepping out from behind a stack of crates. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of whatever she had discovered. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you came." He nodded, but didn't relax. "What did you find, Sarah?" She hesitated, then handed him a small, encrypted drive. It's the missing piece, Daniel. Everything we need to expose the syndicate, to bring down Carter and Jennings. But there's more. Something you need to know." Daniel took the drive, but before he could respond, the warehouse lights flickered on, blinding him momentarily. He heard the unmistakable sound of guns being cocked and spun around to see Carter and Jennings stepping out of the shadows, flanked by armed men. Panic gripped Daniel as he realized they had been outmaneuvered once again. He had walked right into their trap. "You didn't really think you could outsmart us, did you?" Carter sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You were always just a pawn, Daniel. You and Martha both." Jennings stepped forward, a cold smile on his lips. "It's over. Hand over the document, and maybe we'll let you live." Daniel's mind raced. The document wasn't with him, it was with Martha. But if they knew that, then she was in danger. He needed to buy time, to find a way out. He looked at Sarah, hoping for a sign that this wasn't the end, but her expression was blank, unreadable. "I don't have the document," Daniel said, trying to sound defiant. "And even if I did, you wouldn't get it." Carter chuckled darkly. "That's where you're wrong. We've known where it was all along. You didn't think we'd let you just run around with something that valuable, did you? You led us right to it." Daniel's blood ran cold. If they had found the document, then Martha was already compromised. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. He had been played from the start. Every move he thought he was making to outwit them had been carefully orchestrated. Jennings's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen with a smirk. "It's done," he said to Carter. "They've got her." Daniel's heart sank. "What have you done to her?" Jennings's eyes glinted with malice. "She's in custody, but don't worry. We won't hurt her. Yet. First, you're going to tell us exactly who else knows about this little scheme of yours. Then we'll decide what to do with both of you." Desperation clawed at Daniel's throat. He was out of options, out of time. But just as he was about to speak, something unexpected happened. A gunshot rang out, and Jennings staggered back, clutching his chest. Blood spread across his shirt as he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Chaos erupted as Carter's men scrambled for cover, shouting orders and firing in all directions. Daniel hit the floor, crawling behind a pile of crates as bullets flew overhead. He looked up to see Sarah, a smoking gun in her hand, her expression hardened by resolve. "Run, Daniel," she shouted, firing again at one of Carter's men. "Get out of here." Without hesitating, Daniel bolted for the exit, his mind racing. If Jennings was dead, Carter would be in full survival mode. But there was still a chance, a slim, desperate chance, to turn this around. As he burst out of the warehouse, he was met by a screeching of tires. A car pulled up, and to his shock, the driver was Martha. She was alive, but her face was bruised, and her eyes were wild with fear. "Get in," she yelled. Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He jumped into the car, and Martha floored the gas, speeding away from the warehouse as fast as the car could go. Behind them, the sounds of the firefight faded into the distance, but Daniel knew the danger was far from over. As they raced down the highway, Daniel looked at Martha, his mind swirling with questions. "How did you escape? What happened?" Martha glanced at him, her voice trembling. "I don't know how, but someone tipped me off. They came for me, but I was ready. I got out just in time. Daniel, we're not safe yet. Carter will come after us with everything he has." Daniel nodded, trying to make sense of it all. "Sarah, she helped us. She took out Jennings, but Carter's still out there." Martha's grip tightened on the wheel. "Then we have to finish this once and for all." They drove in silence for what felt like hours, each lost in their thoughts. They were both exhausted, both running on pure adrenaline. But as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Daniel knew there was only one way this could end. "We need to release the document," he said quietly. "All of it. If we go public, it's our only shot. No more hiding. No more running." Martha nodded, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Agreed. But where?" Daniel thought for a moment, then made a decision. "There's a place, an old contact of mine. Someone who can get this out to the world without being traced. It's risky, but it's all we've got." They drove to a remote location, a safe house used by an old friend of Daniel's, a hacker with a reputation for being untraceable. They handed over the document, every piece of damning evidence they had collected. Once it was done, there was no turning back. Within hours, the information was everywhere. News outlets, social media, private channels, the syndicate's secrets, Carter's betrayals, the names of everyone involved. It all went public. The reaction was immediate and explosive. As the fallout began, Daniel and Martha knew they had only one choice left: to disappear completely. They would never be safe, but at least they had struck a blow that would cripple their enemies. In the days that followed, they watched from the shadows as the syndicate crumbled, as Carter was arrested, and as their world finally began to right itself. But the cost had been high, and the scars would never fully heal. One night, as they sat by a fire in a remote cabin, Martha turned to Daniel and asked the question that had been haunting them both. "Do you think it's over?" Daniel stared into the flames, the warmth doing little to ease the coldness he felt inside. "I don't know," he said honestly. Maybe not. But we did what we had to do." Martha nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And now, Daniel said, we start over, together, wherever that takes us." They sat in silence, the past finally behind them, the future uncertain. They had survived the game, but it had cost them everything they once knew. All they had left was each other, and the hope that maybe they could find some peace. But deep down, Daniel knew the truth. There would always be someone out there, someone looking for revenge, someone trying to finish what had been started. The game was over for now, but the pieces would eventually be reset.